My husband, David, and I have been married for the past 8 years. We have a son together called Tom. He is currently 4 years old and is a very playful kid with a hyperactive imagination. Tom has always been close to me and is a bit of a mama's boy, which I don't mind at all, since I know as soon as he turns into a teenager, he will have his own interests and may not want to spend as much time with me anymore. David and I are excellent partners, and over the years we have perfected our routine in taking care of the house, Tom, as well as have fulfilling careers of our own. Honestly, this harmony between us has been possible because I thought I had a very respectful and communicative husband like David. So you would imagine that I have nothing to complain about on Reddit, right? Well, I am making this post today on my husband's sister, Kathy. Now, I don't want to start off by showing my bias towards her, but let's just say that Kathy is extremely difficult to get along with. She has always been ice cold towards me right from the start, and this behavior has remained the same even though I and David have now been married for a very long time. I remember during the beginning of our dating phase, David told me that his parents would easily approve of me, but that his sister Kathy would definitely grill me because she has always been very protective of him. Well, as it turns out, he was right. The first night we met with her, she asked me a bunch of questions about my family, my childhood, and about my siblings. No matter what I answered, she seemed unimpressed and had her nose up in the air the entire time. She would also randomly bring up David's exes in the middle of our conversation and compare them to me as if it were the most normal thing to do. At one point during dinner, she invited David to join her and her girlfriends for a girls' trip, telling how he needed to clear his head before getting serious with someone. This statement really weirded me out and I got visibly annoyed, which David noticed and told his sister to back off as politely as possible. Now this is something that has sometimes annoyed me about my husband. Although he does stand up to his sister, he is not really strong about his boundaries because of his affection towards her. I guess this makes her assume she can keep pushing the matter, all because she is the older sister and according to her, only she has the best interest about him. Since that first dinner date, I was convinced that Kathy and I did not like each other. It did hurt me a bit, but I wasn't going to go out of my way to convince someone to love and accept me if their mind was already made up. Despite this incident, I was always polite to her whenever we did meet next, but she never made it easy for me. One incident in particular that pops up in my mind immediately is David's grandparents' anniversary party. They had invited the entire family and I was invited as David's +1 as we had been dating for 1 year by then. Throughout the party, his family members would come up to me to strike up a conversation, and I honestly loved how chill and friendly his family was. The one person who didn't speak a word to me or even greet me was Kathy. I noticed that and kept out of her way as much as possible. At one point, his grandparents asked everybody to gather around so we could all take a group picture today. As we gathered together, Kathy loudly pointed me out and asked me to get out of the picture. David looked at her with his eyebrows raised as Kathy went on to say that maybe he would break up with me in the future and that she didn't want one of her brother's bimbo to be a part of this picture. My face got red in embarrassment as everyone looked uncomfortable as well. David tried to argue, but Kathy kept talking over him, saying how I was just a random stranger and I should not have even come to this function, to begin with. I had heard enough and I felt utterly humiliated. David had attended many of my family functions and none of my family members had ever treated David this way. I excused myself and walked back into the house so I could look for my car keys. I had no intention of spending a minute longer with that woman. David and his parents came rushing behind me trying to apologize. His mother tried to convince me to go back with them, but the moment had been ruined. I could hear David's grandparents chastising Kathy loudly and I felt even more guilty for ruining everybody's day. I left immediately, and that evening I even contemplated breaking up with David as I knew I could not handle someone like his sister. However, as it turns out, David came to my place with flowers and pastry to apologize. He told me how everyone had laid it on Kathy for being rude to me and that he had threatened to cut off things with her as well, which had apparently made her cry. He told me that he was getting fed up with his sister's antics and that he didn't want anything to do with her. We did talk a lot, but I felt reassured that he stood up for me. In the days that followed, David kept his word. We stopped meeting with Kathy altogether and he stopped picking up her calls. She would sometimes show up at his house unannounced, so he changed all his locks and asked his parents to talk to her so she could respect his private space. His parents supported his decision, so Kathy had no choice but to accept the fact that her brother didn't want anything to do with her. We thought this would make her think and regret the way she treated me, but as it turns out, it had the opposite effect. She started calling me and texting me, and she would leave me threatening messages blaming me for everything. The tip of the hat was when she showed up at my work one afternoon demanding to meet me. Luckily, my manager intervened and kicked her out, but I was really shaken up. I told David that at this point, I had no choice but to break up with him to get away from his crazy sister, file a case against her, and take her to court for harassing me. David started to cry hearing this, pleading with me that there was no reason to break up, and begged me to give him a chance so he could take care of it. He then convinced his parents to set up a meeting between him and Kathy at their place, where they ultimately had their last conversation. His parents knew about what she was doing to me and made it very clear to her that they wanted nothing to do with her anymore as well. David and his parents warned Kathy that the way she was behaving was borderline crazy, and if she continued they would all support my decision to take her to court. I don't know how, but Kathy finally broke down and admitted that she needed help. She opened up to them about how she was just spiraling and didn't know how to stop. She also revealed to everyone that she had lost her job and had been unemployed for the last few months, which had added on to her poor mental health. Luckily for her, David's parents stepped up and admitted her to a psychiatric hospital immediately where she could be closely monitored. David reiterated his wish of not staying in touch with her, which Kathy finally learned to accept. She did send me an apology text, which in my opinion, seemed a bit half-hearted, but for her sake, I hoped that she would heal. When David and I finally got married, we decided to not invite Kathy even though she had eventually been discharged and seemed to be doing well in her life. I wanted nothing to do with her and everybody respected my wish. She did send me flowers congratulating me on my happy day, which I very much appreciated. Right after we got married and returned from our honeymoon, Kathy announced that she was getting married. Everybody was surprised since no one even knew that she had been dating anyone at this point, but we were all pleased for her at the same time until we learned that she was dating a guy she had met during her time in the psychiatric hospital. Now, just to give you all the full context, this guy, James, was schizophrenic and an alcoholic who had volatile tendencies according to his doctors. Understandably, David and Kathy's parents were a bit worried when they found out. Kathy announced to everyone that her marriage would take place the next month and she wanted only David to be there and not me. I kind of expected it, and it made me relieved that she had not invited me, as it saved me the time to come up with an excuse for not attending. However, my husband felt offended that his sister just invited him and not me, so he did not attend the wedding as well. Those who did end up attending their wedding later told us what a nightmare the event was. It turns out that Kathy and James were totally wasted during the ceremony and could not even properly repeat the words after the priest. During the reception, James kept drinking and got so blackout drunk that he started to rip open his shirt and pants while everyone just stared at him in horror. Being schizophrenic, James did not like the staring and immediately attacked a server at the event who was just an innocent bystander, screaming about how the server looked suspicious and was hiding something. James' family eventually calmed him down and convinced the server to not press any charges against James by paying him off. However, this incident understandably scarred everyone, and we all felt quite worried about Kathy's safety. If James could attack a random stranger, then what was the guarantee that he would not attack her? David and his parents did try to get Kathy to talk to her privately about her husband's strange behavior, but Kathy seemed convinced that she could change him and make him alright. No matter how much her parents tried to tell her about the red flags, she seemed convinced that James would never harm her in any way. I wish I could write here that she was right, but as you can already expect, James treated her exactly like everybody warned her about. Over the years, David and his parents tried to stay in touch with Kathy, but James would knowingly cut off her contact with anybody and prevent her from talking to anyone. We could not file a case against him because Kathy refused to accept any help. On 2 occasions, we heard that police were called to their place because the neighbors could hear them arguing and getting physically violent with each other. Despite everything, Kathy never budged and seemed convinced that he was the one for her. 4 years ago, I got pregnant with Tom. Everyone was overjoyed with happiness. For my baby shower, I wanted Kathy to be a part of the celebration, so we sent her an invitation. We never got any reply back from her, which worried us, so David decided to drive to her place to check up on her. It turns out James had completely cut her off from any communication with us and had thrown away our invitation so she would not even find out. I don't know exactly what happened, but David understandably got pissed, so he and James exchanged a few heated words which did not end up going anywhere because Kathy did not feel that what her husband had been doing was wrong in any way. In frustration, David left, and that was the last we knew anything about her. We never contacted her ever again, even when Tom was born. Her parents also stopped going above and beyond to convince her, and we all just prayed that she would be okay. These past few years after Tom was born have been utterly peaceful and full of love. David and I never had any major issues to begin with, and now we have both reached a wonderful understanding and rhythm in our marriage. Tom is a very curious kid and he keeps us busy with his antics. David's parents visit us every weekend so they can babysit for a few hours while David and I have our weekly date night. It gives us some time off while the grandparents spend quality time with Tom. Everything seemed to be going well until 8 months ago when Kathy showed up at our doorsteps all muddy and disheveled. Her feet looked dirty and she had no shoes on. We immediately let her in and I rushed to bring her a blanket as she seemed to be shivering. We had not seen her for years at this point, so we did not know what to say. David kept stroking her hair and asking her if she was okay. Kathy looked numb and stared off into nothing in particular. Eventually, she revealed to us that she had just miscarried. We sat in shock as she continued to recount how she had gotten pregnant a month ago and thought James would be happy for her. In the beginning, he was, but over the weeks he got more and more suspicious that this baby was going to take her away from him and that she would not love him the same. They would fight a lot and he would threaten to mix rat poison in her food to make her lose the child. Kathy told us that she woke up that day feeling uneasy, and when she went to the doctor she found out that she had lost her child. She felt so sick and numb that she could not get into the car and drive back home, so she decided to just walk. Somehow her brain led her up to our house, but I guess she must have at least walked 20 blocks or more bare feet. She did not remember why she had no shoes on. I felt so sorry for her and immediately gave her a hug. She took a moment to register the hug, but when she did, she hugged me back. We sat there for 5 whole minutes as Kathy slowly cried into my arms. We knew right then and there that this was her way of asking for help. David seemed ready to confront James directly, but I persuaded him to call the police and notify their parents, who would be better equipped to handle the situation. His parents were incredibly grateful to have their daughter back and assured her they would support her no matter what. When the police took her statement, they were as shocked as us by the multiple abuses that Kathy had endured in her marriage until that point and kept quiet. James was then immediately arrested despite his protest and threats. He did keep denying until the very end that he had nothing to do with her miscarriage, but as it turns out from Kathy's tox report, she had been indeed poisoned by him, which led to the loss of her baby. Long story short, because of James' mental issues and his incompetency to stand trial, the judge sentenced him to a psychiatric facility for treatment indefinitely. This decision was obviously frustrating, but we were also grateful to have Kathy back, safe and sound. I have to clarify that all my previous feelings of animosity towards her had disappeared at this point. As a woman, I felt bad for her and I wanted nothing but to forget our past so we could keep moving forward. I wished nothing but for Kathy to heal after all this ordeal. She also seemed calm around me and was no longer mean. When we felt she was ready, we introduced Tom to her as we thought it would help her recover faster. She got extremely close to Tom in a short time, which none of us minded really. I guess this should have been my first red flag. Over the weeks, she would find ways to spend more and more time with my son by showing up unexpectedly at our place without calling first. She was staying with her and David's parents so she could easily just drive over. She would insist on giving Tom baths or reading him his bedtime stories, which, at first, seemed like a kind gesture. However, her increasing presence started to feel a bit weird. It reached a point where Kathy would come over almost every day, unannounced, and always find a reason to stay longer than necessary. She'd bring toys and gifts for Tom, always seeking to be involved in his daily routines. She would also weirdly comment about his clothes or about his hairstyle, telling me how Tom would look better this way or that way, which bothered me a bit. While I appreciated her efforts to bond with him, it began to feel like she was slowly getting back to her old ways of undermining me. However, this time, instead of her brother, it was about my son, and my mama bear instinct kicked in. I talked to David, who assured me that maybe I was just overthinking and that his sister was just trying to cope with her pain. He reminded me how she had just lost her child, which made me feel guilty, so I decided to just let her be. If taking care of my son made her feel happy for a few minutes, then what's the harm here, right? As the days went on, I tried my best to be accommodating with her presence in our house constantly. She started to look after Tom every day when we were at work and would even take him to play at the park in the evening. Sometimes when I would come back home, I would notice how my son did not show the same enthusiasm for me anymore as he always did. He never ran up to greet me anymore and would look at me curiously. After Kathy would leave, I would try to talk to Tom about the day and if he had any troubles with Kathy around, but he would not participate much in the conversation. My son, who was always joyful around me, seemed sad and less enthusiastic. As his mother, I felt really worried about the change in my son's behavior, but whenever I tried to talk to my husband about it, he would gently tell me that I was just thinking too much about trivial things. David would try to assure me that it was all in my head and that Tom was just growing up. However, the nagging feeling inside my head kept bothering me, so I talked to one of my coworkers about it, who gave me the brilliant plan that I could buy nanny cams from Amazon and install it in my son's room and our living room to keep an eye on Tom. This was an ingenious idea and I bought 2 cams immediately. I never told David about this as I did not want him to dismiss my feelings yet again. Yesterday, I came back home and after Tom went to bed, I decided to check the nanny cams I had set up. David was watching TV downstairs, so I sat in my study room to watch the video, which had audio as well. At first, it was just Kathy taking care of Tom and playing around with him. She seemed really good with children. However, imagine my surprise when I saw Kathy bring out a book from inside her purse, which was not something I had noticed before. Generally, we have age-appropriate books to read for our son in his room, but this book was different. She read the book to Tom before his nap time in the afternoon. As I listened to her reading the story, I realized the story was about adoption and how a mother sometimes gives up her child to another mother to be taken care of. As Kathy kept reading the story to my son, she would add in how this is why she had left Tom behind in my care all those years ago, because she wasn't ready then. My eyes widened in horror as she went on to tell my child that no matter what happens, she will always remain his real mother and that no one could love him more than her. She kissed his forehead and left him to take his nap. My hands shook in anger as I finally understood the crap she had been feeding my son for God knows how long, which had clearly made my son behave weirdly around me. This poor child must be feeling terribly confused and just did not know what to believe. I was ready to storm downstairs and ask my husband to never let his sister inside our place ever again, but something stopped me. Instead, I decided to take the day off so I could spend some alone time with my son and find out what exactly Kathy has been telling him to brainwash him. When I told Kathy today that she did not have to come over and babysit, she freaked out, insisting that she loved spending time with my son, but I firmly told her to back off and that I wanted the day with my child. David did ask me if I was feeling well and I assured him that everything was okay but that I just needed a break. Later, I took my son to his favorite park so we could play around the whole day. We had pizzas and spent the whole day laughing and having a good time. Before bringing up the conversation, I wanted my son to feel safe around me. When I did start asking him about what his aunt and he had been talking about, he got a bit quiet. I promised Tom that he was not in trouble in any way and that I just wanted him to know that he could talk to me about anything. This is when my son spilled the truth. He told me how Kathy had been trying to convince him for weeks that she was his real mother even though he did not really believe it. She would also tell him how I would eventually leave him because only real mothers love their children. Because of her insistence, he felt scared of asking me about it in case I would really kick him out. He told me that he loved me and he did not want to go live with Kathy. Hearing those words, my heart broke for him as I stared at his tear-streaked face. He looked so small and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the joyful and playful boy I knew so well. I knelt down to his level, gently took his hands in mine, and assured him that everything was going to be okay. We would get through this together, no matter what. I hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of his fears and pain. I felt like a loser for having failed to protect my son from this psycho. I assured him that he had nothing to worry about and that me and David would take care of this. However, my son then informed me that David already knew about all this. I asked him what he meant and he said, "I asked Daddy and he knows about this but he told me not to tell you anything." The blood drained from my face as I realized that my husband, despite finding out what his sister was up to, had chosen to protect her instead of our son. He already knew about everything. I could not let my son around these people anymore. I did not want my son to be confused and frightened about his own mother. I was his mother and it was my job to protect him from this. I quickly drove home and packed our bags. I told my parents that I was coming over to their place and that if David asked, we would tell him that I missed them and wanted to spend time with them. Luckily for me, my parents are very supportive so they did not even hesitate to say yes. As I am writing this, I have already talked to my parents about everything and they are as shocked as me about what Kathy has been telling my son. David did call me when he must have returned home to an empty house but I tried to sound as normal as possible, telling him that I needed a break from our place and my work. He did sound curious but I assured him that I would stay with my parents for just a few days. We seldom fight so I guess he didn't think much about it even though my behavior must have seemed strange to him. I am so conflicted right now. I have no idea what I should do. How should I be confronting this situation? Ida for distancing my son and me from my husband's crazy sister? Update 1. Wow, I woke up to almost 600 plus comments under my post. I can't believe so many people even use Reddit and have come across my post. I have used all fake names in my story so hopefully none of David's family members find out that this is about him. Also to those people who are dragging me in the comments for not talking to my husband about this first, I assure you that I would have definitely talked to my husband had my son not told me that he had tried to talk to David about this when he first found out. Call it my mother's instinct but the fact that my husband knew for weeks about how differently my son had been behaving with me but would gaslight me continuously goes on to show that a confrontation with him would not have led to anything constructive. I also wanted to take my son immediately out of the situation and he is now much safer with my parents here. No psycho can feed him lies and that's all that matters. Kathy has tried to get in touch with me several times, sending me multiple messages insisting that she needs to meet my son and how much she misses him. I plan on putting an end to this for once and for all in the upcoming family get-together at David's parents' place this coming weekend. This get-together has been planned for weeks in advance by me as David's grandparents are visiting and I thought we could all spend some quality time together. However, in light of recent events, I plan on using this opportunity to speak my truth and make sure that Kathy comes nowhere near my son ever again. Update 2. I am back with an update. I finally confronted David and Kathy as planned during their family get-together. I was so nervous before going but I decided to take the nanny cam recording with me so I could have legitimate proof to show everyone. Without going into too much detail and just getting straight to the point, I did call out Kathy in front of everyone during lunch. She looked shaken up and tried to laugh it off as if it wasn't a big deal. Then I showed her the nanny cam and told her how I had recorded what she had told my son. I watched the color drain from her face as I then sent the video to the family group chat so everyone could see what I was talking about. Her parents were horrified as they watched her trying to convince my son that she was his real mommy. After this, I confronted David and told him how he failed to protect our son. My husband looked really guilty but tried to justify saying he didn't think much about it and thought this would help his sister get over her grief. He felt torn between supporting his sister's recovery and telling me about it but ultimately he chose to keep quiet. I informed him that because of his actions, I did not trust him anymore and could not let my son around him or his family ever again. For the first time in a long time, I watched my husband break down in tears but I did not budge from my decision. I informed him that I couldn't have my son grow up in a family where his dad refused to stand up for him just to protect his mentally ill sister. David and Kathy's parents and grandparents apologized to me and assured me that they would make sure that Kathy came nowhere near our son ever again. Kathy looked utterly humiliated but didn't even have the shame to apologize once. David kept justifying his actions but I paid no heed. I left shortly after this confrontation as my work here was done and I wanted nothing to do with either of them anymore. Update 3. I see some of you are confused with my decision, so I just wanted to clarify. Yes, I plan on divorcing my husband. I know many of you wanted me to give a second chance to my husband as this wasn't entirely his fault, and I do agree, David is a good man. However, a good man doesn't automatically make him a good father. Just because he and I never had any issues doesn't mean he was a good father to Tom. He should have nipped this from the beginning when our son came to him with doubts instead of spending weeks trying to cover it up and gaslight me. Both me and my son can't trust him anymore. I welcomed Kathy back into my life with open arms after what she went through because as a woman I felt sorry for her, but in the end, she proved exactly why I never liked her in the first place. I understand the abuse Kathy went through was extremely traumatic for her, but that doesn't mean that our son should have to pay for it. She was a grown-ass woman who clearly had mental issues to begin with, but we thought she had gotten better. However, what really surprised me was my husband's. The fact that he would choose her mental well-being over our son's proves why he should never be around Tom. He was always such a supportive husband and I thought I could trust him, but since what happened with Kathy, he clearly wanted to protect her more than us. I promise that from now on, I will protect my son no matter what happens. I am confident I can get full custody of my son if I expose his family history during the custody battle.